Keanu Reeves stepped onto the private jet quietly. No entourage. No assistants. No flashing cameras. Just a worn leather jacket, faded jeans, and old sneakers that had clearly seen better days. The cabin smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel. The leather seats gleamed under the overhead lights. Everything looked pristine. Yet the air felt tense. The flight attendant noticed him immediately. She was young, confident, and used to being in charge here. She pointed at the row of empty seats near the back. "Sir, please follow the rules," she said, her tone sharp, bordering on irritation. Keanu nodded. Not a word. Not a reaction. Just a calm, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, as if nothing had happened. A few passengers glanced over. Whispers rippled down the aisle. Some recognized him instantly, but most didn't. To them, he was just another man stepping onto the plane. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked slowly, almost deliberately, to his seat. What no one in that cabin realized was this. He owned the airline. Not partially. Not as a silent investor. He controlled 53% of everything. The planes, the schedules, the crew, even the management. And yet they treated him like a stranger. Keanu sat down, buckled his seatbelt, and stared out the window. Outside, the sun glinted off the tarmac. Inside, the crew continued their routine, unaware that the man they had just scolded could fire each one of them with a single phone call. For years he had avoided these flights. Rarely did he step onto a plane under his own company. Emails, calls, reports, he handled those quietly. But appearances? Rare. Very rare. That morning he came unannounced. Not to intimidate. Not to assert dominance. But to see the truth. How do the people around you behave when they think you don't matter? How do they treat someone they believe has no power? A tense silence settled over the cabin. Everyone felt it. Something was different. Something was coming. And in the back of their minds they all sensed it, though they didn't yet know how dangerous or how decisive this quiet man in the leather jacket really was. Backhand index pointing right. What would you do if someone disrespected you in your own space? Would you stay calm or let your anger take control? Most of the people on that plane had no idea who Keanu Reeves really was. To them, he was just another passenger, quiet, calm, almost unremarkable. A man in a worn leather jacket and sneakers. Nothing about him screamed power or authority. But the truth was, Keanu wasn't just a passenger. He wasn't here for comfort or leisure. He was here to observe. Keanu Reeves owned the airline. Or rather, he controlled it. Not as a silent investor. Not as a figurehead. He held 53% of the company, more than half of everything around him. Every plane, every flight schedule, every crew member, every decision, all under his authority. Yet most of the people on this jet had no clue. For years he had avoided stepping into these planes. His leadership had been quiet. Emails, calls, reports. He trusted his team to run operations. And until now he had rarely appeared in person. But that morning, everything changed. He had come unannounced. Not to intimidate. Not to flaunt power. But to see reality for himself. Because real leadership, he knew, isn't about titles. It's about behavior under observation. It's about how people act when they think no one important is watching. The flight attendant's slap wasn't just disrespect. It was a symptom. A glimpse into the arrogance that had taken root over the years. Keanu noticed the way the crew moved, the way they whispered to one another, the way they glanced at him with casual indifference. He watched, silently, like a predator circling its prey. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some stared openly. Others tried to hide their curiosity. No one spoke to him. No one offered water. No one acknowledged that he was even there. And yet he remained calm. Not a twitch. Not a flinch. Just observation. He remembered the countless times leaders fail, not because of incompetence, but because they ignore disrespect. They underestimate arrogance. They let people act without accountability. Keanu didn't make a sound, but inside he was taking note of every detail. Every glance. Every snicker. Every subtle act of defiance or disregard. He reflected on the years he had invested in this airline. The risks he had taken, the hours spent building something from nothing. And now, the people he trusted with the operation, the ones he relied on to maintain safety, order, and professionalism, were showing him exactly who they were when they thought he couldn't see. This wasn't just about a slap on a plane. This was about character. About integrity. About the truth that emerges when power is invisible. Have you ever noticed how people treat you when they think you don't matter? It's a moment that reveals more than any meeting or presentation ever could. Keanu leaned back slightly in his seat, letting the silence stretch. Time slowed down. Every movement in the cabin was amplified. Every whispered word carried weight. Every glance, every smirk told a story. He wasn't angry, not yet. But he was observing, calculating, waiting. Because in the next few minutes, the quiet leather-jacketed man on the plane would redefine authority for everyone on board. And by the time the plane landed, no one would look at him, or the crew, the same way again. The cabin was tense. Keanu Reeves sat quietly, his eyes scanning the room, but his expression betrayed nothing. Calm, controlled, almost serene. The flight attendant who had slapped him earlier leaned against the galley wall, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. Other crew members whispered among themselves, glancing at him like he was some minor inconvenience, a passenger who had accidentally wandered into their world. "Did you see him?" one whispered to another. "Yeah, just some guy," the other replied, shaking his head. None of them realized the truth. Keanu was the owner of this jet, this airline, and the very system they depended on to pay their bills. Yet here they were, judging him by the worn leather jacket, the faded sneakers, the quiet demeanor. He didn't move. He didn't react. He simply observed. Passengers began to notice the tension. Some glanced nervously, sensing the subtle power play unfolding in the cabin. Others pretended not to notice, but even they couldn't ignore the silent drama. A few executives from the company were aboard, discussing paperwork and sipping coffee. One of them glanced at Keanu's clothes and laughed under his breath. Another gestured at a colleague, whispering something that made the two of them chuckle. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. He watched. Not with anger. Not with fear. Just observation. 7 minutes passed. Not a word from the crew. Not a single apology. No acknowledgement of the slap. No recognition of the man sitting quietly in their midst. Behind the glass of the cockpit, the pilot's eyes flicked toward the cabin, sensing the tension. The boardroom in his mind, the meetings, the corporate world he had built, seemed miles away, yet the behavior mirrored what he had seen in offices, restaurants, and public spaces. Arrogance hiding behind assumed authority. The crew continued their routine. Folding napkins. Checking supplies. Smiling politely at passengers. All the while, the disrespect lingered like smoke. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. Every laugh, every smirk, every glance was a data point. Every action revealed more about character than any report or email ever could. And then it hit him. The slap wasn't just an isolated act of disrespect. It was a symptom. A microcosm of arrogance, entitlement, and a lack of understanding about real power. He remembered the countless times people assumed authority came from titles, money, or appearances. They judged by surface-level signs, ignoring what truly mattered: integrity, respect, and human decency. As the minutes stretched, the cabin felt smaller. Tension built like static electricity in the air. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the silent man who refused to react, who refused to argue. Their discomfort grew because they sensed something monumental was about to happen. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He simply watched, and in that quiet observation, the truth of the entire crew's character revealed itself. Backhand index pointing right. Has this ever happened to you? Someone judged you unfairly, ignored your presence, or treated you poorly, simply based on appearances? Those moments stick with you. They tell you more about the other person than you'll ever learn from words alone. Because arrogance, when unobserved, always shows itself. And Keanu Reeves was watching. Keanu Reeves stood slowly. The leather jacket creaked as he adjusted it. Every movement was deliberate, calm, almost casual, but underneath, a storm of authority simmered. The cabin went quiet. Passengers instinctively turned their heads. Even the whispering crew stopped mid-conversation. Something had changed, though no one could articulate exactly what. He walked toward the galley first, where the flight attendant who had slapped him was still standing, smug, convinced she held the upper hand. "Do you know who you just slapped?" Keanu asked, his voice low, calm, controlled. Her smirk faltered. She blinked, trying to mask the sudden unease. I was just," she started. Keanu didn't let her finish. He reached into his jacket pocket and slowly pulled out a company ID card. Not flashy. Just a simple card with his name and title, majority shareholder, owner. He placed it on the counter, letting it slide slowly, deliberately into her line of sight. The crew froze. A passenger gasped quietly. The atmosphere shifted. In an instant, every laugh, every smirk, every whisper disappeared. Eyes widened. Smiles vanished. The realization hit like lightning. This wasn't just a passenger. This was the man whose decisions controlled their jobs, their schedules, and their very lives. Every plane they flew, every flight they managed, all of it was under his authority. For a moment, there was silence so thick it was almost tangible. The kind of silence that fills a room when the air itself seems to hold its breath. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. Power wasn't in shouting, it was in the quiet fact of truth. And the truth was staring them all in the face. He walked calmly down the aisle, stopping in front of each crew member as if giving them time to fully understand the weight of their actions. He looked them in the eye, each one, a mirror reflecting arrogance, ignorance, and disrespect. Passengers whispered among themselves. One reached for their phone, clearly tempted to film the moment. But even they sensed that this wasn't about drama. This was about justice, observation, and truth. Keanu finally reached the cockpit, where the pilot and co-pilot had been nervously watching the unfolding drama. He didn't yell or accuse. He simply placed his hand on the dashboard and said, softly but firmly, "I came here to see how people treat someone they think has no power." The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Every crew member felt them. Every passenger felt them. Then came the final blow, though not physical. "Not yet. You've shown your true character today," Keanu continued, his voice unwavering. "And character has consequences." He paused, letting the weight of his presence sink in. Then, with the same calm precision, he pulled out a folder of documents. Flight logs. Employee evaluations. Safety reports. Emails. Every small detail of mismanagement, arrogance, and disrespect meticulously recorded over months. "This," he said, tapping the folder, "is what happens when you think the rules don't apply to you. When you think you can disrespect someone without repercussions. This isn't just about the slap. This is about the choices you've made." The cabin was utterly silent. The crew's faces were pale. Some avoided eye contact. Others tried to straighten their uniforms as if that could undo the reality before them. Keanu Reeves didn't need to yell. He didn't need to threaten. His calm presence, his authority, and the undeniable truth of his power did the work. The realization hit. Everything they had assumed about power, respect, and authority was wrong. And the man they had disrespected was about to show them why arrogance can never go unpunished. Backhand index pointing right, and this was only the beginning. Keanu Reeves didn't move immediately after revealing his identity. He let the silence stretch. Let the tension settle like a storm waiting to break. The flight attendant who had slapped him still stood frozen, her hand twitching slightly as if she wanted to apologize but couldn't summon the courage. The rest of the crew shifted uncomfortably. Every whisper, every laugh from earlier seemed to have been swallowed by the weight of the truth. Then, with a calm precision that made the air itself feel heavier, Keanu reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. A thick one. Full of documents. Flight logs, emails, schedules, complaints, hundreds of pages meticulously organized. He placed it on the nearest counter. The slap? That was minor. What he had uncovered in these documents was monumental. "They've been planning to sell parts of this company without disclosure," he said, his voice low but carrying through the cabin. "Secret deals. Hidden transfers. Financial mismanagement. Hundreds of jobs at risk. Flight safety compromised. And all of it, behind my back." Every eye widened. The crew, who had been smug moments ago, now stared blankly. The passengers whispered nervously. Some were reaching for their phones, but even they hesitated, sensing this was no ordinary confrontation. Keanu continued, his voice deliberate, measured. 4 months, you've operated under the assumption that no one was watching. That your arrogance would go unnoticed. That you could disrespect, lie, and manipulate without consequence. But truth always surfaces. The documents weren't just evidence, they were a mirror. Each misstep, each act of negligence, each subtle arrogance was captured in black and white. The flight attendant's eyes darted to the folder. She tried to glance away, but Keanu's gaze held her in place. She realized fully that the slap wasn't the end of the problem, it was the opening act. He gestured toward the documents. "Look at this," he said. "Hidden transfers. Flight schedules manipulated for personal convenience. Passengers put at risk. Employees' complaints ignored. And worst of all, you all thought you were untouchable." The crew exchanged nervous glances. The smirks were gone. The arrogance, the laughter, the casual indifference, it had vanished. In its place was fear, unease, a dawning realization of how badly they had misjudged the man sitting quietly among them. One of the junior crew members, trembling, whispered, I didn't know." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He let the words hang. Ignorance was no excuse. Arrogance, he had learned, was far more dangerous than any mistake. "This isn't personal," Keanu said finally. "This is about accountability. About showing what happens when respect is ignored. About revealing the truth that arrogance always hides but never escapes." A senior crew member stepped forward, trying to defend herself. "Sir, we didn't." Keanu held up a hand. Silence returned instantly. "It doesn't matter what you didn't know. It matters what you did. And how you acted when you thought no one important was watching. That's what defines character. That's what defines integrity." He leaned closer to the folder, flipping through the pages slowly. Each document was a testament to the mismanagement, the neglect, and the silent chaos that had been brewing. "You see," Keanu continued, "disrespect isn't just about the slap. It's about everything you allowed to happen because you assumed authority gave you freedom from consequence. Every ignored complaint, every secret transfer, every smirk and whisper, it all tells a story. And the story is simple: arrogance will always reveal itself." Passengers looked on in stunned silence. Some couldn't believe what they were witnessing. Crew members' faces were pale, their postures rigid, their confidence shattered. The realization wasn't just professional, it was personal. They had underestimated someone who had quietly built an empire and observed their every move, without interference, without reaction, and without emotion. Keanu's eyes swept across the cabin. Calm, unyielding, controlled. "And now," he said, "the consequences begin." The weight of his presence, combined with the damning evidence, was undeniable. No one dared speak. No one dared move. They finally understood the magnitude of their actions. This wasn't just about disrespect or a single moment. This was about truth, power, and integrity. And for the first time, the crew realized exactly who they had been dealing with, and exactly why arrogance never goes unnoticed. Backhand index pointing right. Should people like this be forgiven? When your actions risk not just respect but safety, honesty, and livelihoods, does ignorance excuse your behavior? The plane was silent, except for the faint hum of the engines. But within that silence, the weight of accountability was louder than any shout, louder than any slap, louder than any argument. And Keanu Reeves, seated, or standing, watching, observing, was the embodiment of that quiet, undeniable force. The cabin was frozen. Every crew member, every passenger, every person on board felt it, the quiet but undeniable gravity of the moment. Keanu Reeves stood in the aisle, leather jacket slightly creased, sneakers firmly planted on the polished floor. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. Power didn't come from volume. Power came from presence, from the undeniable authority of truth, from the calm control of a man who could dismantle their lives with a single word. He glanced around. His eyes, steady and unflinching, met each crew member's gaze in turn. He wasn't angry. Not yet. He wasn't seeking revenge. He was observing, assessing, measuring. The final judgment was about to be delivered. "I didn't come here to be recognized," he said, his voice low but carrying through the cabin, "and I didn't come here to assert dominance. I came to see how you treat people you think don't matter." The words hit like a hammer. Every whisper, every smirk, every casual act of disrespect replayed in their minds. They had assumed they were untouchable. That authority came from their positions. That arrogance would be invisible. They had been wrong. Keanu paused. Let the silence stretch. Let the tension build. He could see it in their eyes. The fear, the realization, the dawning comprehension of the consequences they had invited by their own behavior. "You've shown exactly who you are," he continued, "and in doing so you've made a choice. A choice about character. A choice about integrity. And every choice has consequences." The flight attendant who had slapped him earlier shrank back slightly. Her face was pale. She had assumed she was just asserting control over a passenger who had no power. She hadn't realized the quiet leather-jacketed man before her wasn't just any passenger. He was the man in control of everything she relied on. Keanu's gaze swept across the cabin. Calm, deliberate, final. The actions you've taken, or failed to take, aren't isolated. They aren't mistakes to be forgiven lightly. They reflect a pattern. A system of arrogance, negligence, and disrespect. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out the documents he had collected. Flight schedules, reports of ignored complaints, emails revealing mismanagement, secret plans for company transfers, and incidents of negligence. Every page was a testament to their disregard for the rules, for passengers, for each other, and most importantly, for the truth. He placed the folder on the counter and looked up. You believed your power came from your uniforms, your positions, your smiles, your whispers. But real power, he said slowly, letting the weight of each word sink in, comes from respect, integrity, and accountability. And you have failed on all three. A junior crew member finally spoke, voice trembling. Sir, we didn't realize. Keanu raised a hand. Silence returned immediately. No excuses. No apologies could undo the magnitude of their actions. I didn't come here to judge personalities, he said. I came to judge character. And the verdict is clear. He paused. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Passengers glanced nervously at one another. The crew's postures stiffened, their faces pale. They knew something monumental was about to happen. You're all terminated. Effective immediately, Keanu stated, his voice calm, precise, and unyielding. A ripple of shock passed through the cabin. Eyes widened. Some stammered, unable to form words. Others simply froze, realizing the full weight of what had just been pronounced. Security personnel, called in quietly ahead of time, entered the cabin calmly, moving with quiet authority, ready to enforce the decision if necessary. In seconds, the power balance had shifted entirely. The arrogance, the casual disregard, the smirks and whispers, all vanished. The crew who had believed themselves untouchable were now powerless, facing the immediate consequences of their choices. Keanu walked slowly back down the aisle, surveying the stunned faces. Calm. Controlled. Observing as always. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It was about accountability. This company, he said finally, addressing the remaining passengers as much as the crew, will no longer allow arrogance to masquerade as authority. Respect is not given because of position or appearance. Respect is earned by action, by integrity, and by character. A murmur of understanding spread among the passengers. Even they realized the lesson being delivered was bigger than a single flight. It was a statement about power, justice, and human behavior. Keanu took his seat again, calm, unshaken. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. The lesson had been delivered. The balance restored. The crew, now under the watchful eye of security, understood that respect, and the consequences of disrespect, were non-negotiable. The arrogance that had blinded them was stripped away. In its place, clarity, accountability, and the undeniable reality that actions, no matter how small, always have consequences. Backhand index pointing right if you believe respect matters more than status, authority, or appearance like this. Because arrogance is always revealed, and consequences always follow. The cabin was quiet. Completely quiet. The crew, who had moments ago acted as if the leather-jacketed man was beneath notice, were now silent, pale, and trembling. Some leaned against the walls for support, others hunched over their seats, their faces pale with shock. In the space of a few minutes, the balance of power had shifted entirely. Keanu Reeves walked slowly down the aisle, his eyes calm, steady, yet piercing. Every glance he cast was measured, deliberate. He didn't need to raise his voice or make threats. The sheer presence of a man who had quietly observed, understood, and delivered justice was enough. Passengers looked on wide-eyed. Some whispered among themselves. Some reached for their phones, unsure whether they should capture this unprecedented scene or simply remain silent. All could feel the weight of the moment. Respect and character were not abstract concepts. They were enforceable and consequences were real. Keanu stopped in the middle of the cabin, turned, and addressed the crew. Not angrily. Not condescendingly. Calmly. Firmly. Your jobs are safe, he said. The words came slowly, deliberately. But safety is more than a paycheck or a title. Safety is built on respect. For yourself, for your colleagues, for the people who rely on you. And that respect must be consistent, unwavering, and unconditional. There was a pause. The crew listened intently, the weight of accountability finally sinking in. For the first time, they weren't thinking about excuses, protests, or defiance. They were reflecting. Keanu continued. I didn't come here to punish personalities. I came to reveal character. And your character was on full display today. Some of you failed. Some of you succeeded. But the lesson remains, arrogance is easy. Humility is hard. Respect is earned, not assumed, and it is observed in moments no one thinks anyone is watching. A few crew members exchanged glances, shame evident in their eyes. The flight attendant who had slapped him was still frozen, unable to meet his gaze. She realized now that her moment of impulsive anger had been not just a personal mistake, but a professional failing, and that it could have cost her career. Passengers started murmuring quietly among themselves. They had witnessed a rare display of accountability, integrity, and authority. A powerful person had walked into a situation of disrespect, observed carefully, and delivered judgment that was fair, precise, and undeniable. It was a lesson in human behavior, in power dynamics, and in how true leaders operate. Keanu leaned slightly against the counter, his voice softening. This company will never again allow people to be judged by what they wear, by their title, or by their perceived power. Real character is shown by how you treat people who you believe have no authority. That is the measure of integrity. That is the measure of respect. That is the measure of human decency. He scanned the cabin again. Calm. Methodical. The message was clear. Disrespect would no longer go unnoticed. Arrogance would no longer be tolerated. And those who failed to uphold standards of integrity would face the consequences, promptly and fairly. The crew slowly nodded, some in relief, some in understanding, some still in shock. They knew they had been tested, and most had failed. But now the path forward was clear. Respect, integrity, and humility were non-negotiable. Mistakes born of arrogance would no longer be ignored. Keanu straightened, looked out the window at the sun glinting off the tarmac, and then back at the cabin. "I didn't come here for recognition," he said again. "I came to observe truth. I came to see how you behave when you think no one important is watching. And the truth has been revealed." A deep, collective exhale filled the cabin, as if everyone could finally breathe again. Fear had been replaced with clarity. Anxiety had been replaced with awareness. And respect, genuine, earned, undeniable respect, had been re-established. The flight continued. The plane hummed steadily through the sky, and life slowly resumed its rhythm. But nothing on that jet would ever be the same. The lesson had been delivered, the arrogance exposed, and the principle of accountability had been firmly reinstated. Passengers glanced at Keanu with newfound admiration, realizing that leadership isn't about shouting commands, issuing threats, or asserting dominance. It's about observation, understanding, and delivering consequences with precision, fairness, and calm authority. Keanu sat back, relaxed slightly in his seat, letting the hum of the engines fill the silence. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. The lesson was already absorbed. The consequences already felt. And in that quiet, understated victory, the crew, and everyone who had witnessed the moment, understood something vital. True authority is earned, respect is demanded by integrity, and arrogance is always, inevitably revealed. He wasn't ignored because he was weak. He was ignored because others were arrogant. And arrogance, no matter how clever or concealed, always exposes itself. Keanu smiled faintly, a small nod of satisfaction. The cabin, now calm, reflected the restored order. The crew would never forget this day, and the passengers would carry the lesson with them far beyond the flight.